In video games, Easter eggs are small secrets or messages hidden within the game itself. Developers create Easter eggs just for the fun of it, to reward or confuse players who visit lesser known areas of the worlds they build. Easter eggs can be found in film and computing, and even real life. Across the world there are strange objects and features built for the exact same purpose. They are real-life Easter eggs, and they take the form of all kinds of things. 2 years ago I made a video on real-life Easter eggs that featured many of these. Giant pink rabbits in the middle of nowhere. Mysterious buttons that change their surroundings. It's a ridiculous world we live in, and there are so many more out there I decided to make another video. Hidden within a Connecticut forest can be found a small village, and when I say small, I mean of ridiculous proportions. Known as the Abandoned Fairy Village, most who live in surrounding areas have no idea she exists. The buildings themselves are complex, like real structures of a civilization that just happen to be tiny. It's unknown who actually built the village or for what reason. One rumor tells it was built by a local man who went crazy, believing evil fairies were stalking him. Desperate to stop them from terrorizing him, he built them their own home in the woods. Another rumor tells it was literally built by fairies themselves. Either way, it has been abandoned for a long time, left to crumble in the woods that hide it. There is a remote Japanese village notorious for a bizarre World War II legend. Since 1933, it has been said to house the tomb of Jesus Christ. In that year, documents in ancient Hebrew were supposedly found. According to those documents, Jesus never died on the cross, but his brother did in his place. Instead, Jesus fled to Asia, into northern Japan where he became a rice farmer. It's said he married, adopted a Japanese name, and eventually died here at the age of 104. Apparently, the documents were seized by the Japanese government in 1935, and have not been seen since. Still, many locals believe Jesus died in their small village, and have his tomb openly displayed. In the 1980s, strange messages began to appear on the streets of major American cities. Embedded into the concrete of public roads, they were etched into large tiles with a bizarre message. Toying the idea in movie 2001, Resurrect Dead on planet Jupiter. Following decades saw countless more of these tiles emerge in dozens of cities, but there was no sign of who installed them. Still today they are sometimes discovered. It's unknown if they are left by a single person or by some kind of secret society, or even what the message means. It's thought to refer to the philosopher Arnold Toynbee, who said mankind could use technology to create our own heaven, and to a sci-fi film about a man headed from Earth to Jupiter. Perhaps the message is meant to encourage humanity to colonize other planets, or it could just be silly American nonsense. Most of the tiles were removed at one time or another, but some remain, lying in plain sight in the middle of cities like Philadelphia. In the middle of a New England pine forest lies a tiny out-of-place desert. Known as the Desert of Maine, it is just 40 acres in total, and entirely surrounded by woodland. Technically it's not a real desert, as the area gets a lot of rain, and if not for dumb humans it wouldn't even exist. The Desert of Maine was once a farm, with fertile soil covering what is now barren silt. From the late 1700s, the Tuttle family owns the land, growing crops and raising sheep here, but they failed to properly care for the land, and over time the soil eroded. After generations of mismanagement, there was no soil left, just a sand-like mineral called silt. Unable to grow plants in the silt, they sold the land in 1919 for just $300. Since then, it has been preserved as the world's smallest desert. In 1993, a large comet was discovered on course to collide with Jupiter. Most people thought nothing of this, but the council of a small Wyoming city did. They worried that any people living on Jupiter might be in danger, so they officially designated a local airstrip as an intergalactic spaceport. Ever since then, the city of Green River has had its own spaceport ready for alien arrival, the only one of its kind in the world. Now, I do have a history of stating facts that are obvious nonsense, but I promise this one is real. In the middle of Times Square stands an entirely empty building. Despite being a giant skyscraper in one of the world's most valuable areas, it's been empty for 2.5 decades. For most of its history, it housed major corporations. Then in 1995, a bank purchased it with the sole purpose of covering the exterior with adverts. Understanding how iconic Times Square had become, they simply abandoned the 25 floors inside, repurposing the tower as a giant billboard. People thought they were crazy for doing this, but it was a huge success. And as a result of this, there's just an empty tower in the center of Times Square. Deep in the Chilean desert, there is a colossal hand reaching out of the earth, as if the corpse of a giant has been buried. Standing 36 feet tall, it is literally bigger than me, and being 46 miles from the nearest settlement, it's literally in the middle of nowhere. So you're probably wondering what the purpose of this giant hand is, and there isn't one. It was created by an artist to simply give a landmark to an empty stretch of desert. Apparently it's meant to represent something about humanity, but it really doesn't matter. It's just a big hand. In 19th century Ohio, a well-off investor decided to found his own town. He was a very successful man, but establishing a community was no easy feat, and the location he chose was in the middle of nowhere. So to give it a jump start, he literally gave it the name Center of the World. His hope was that rail companies would build a station here, creating a natural inflow of people. That's how a lot of American towns were born. But rail companies chose another nearby town, and he gave up on the whole thing. He simply gave up on the center of the world. But if you visit the area now, you'll still find signs naming it the center of the world. In remote areas of the United States, you might stumble upon one of these, a 70-foot concrete arrow. Due to its size, you might not even notice it, but from the sky you'd see it clearly. They were built in the 1920s to help pilots navigate their way across America. At the time, the US Postal Service had begun to pioneer air delivery, but as there was no radio, pilots often found themselves lost. As a result, Congress ordered a network of giant arrows to literally guide the way. 1,500 were built. Though now a forgotten chapter of aviation, most of the arrows can still be found, and in theory could still be used to navigate. Almost precisely at the bottom of our world stands an eerie Soviet relic. It's known as the Pole of Inaccessibility, which I feel is a misleading name for obvious reasons. The area was first reached in 1958 by a Soviet research team. For 12 days they operated a small research station here, which they built from scratch. Atop the station was a bust of Soviet Union founder Vladimir Lenin. 6 decades later, the station is almost entirely buried in snow, leaving only the bust of Lenin visible. And so it stands alone, as if the Soviets had gone all that way just to build it.